design company. They get good products, and then they design them in a way that makes them easier to use, better, just a better experience. I've really become much more sensitive to design over the past couple of years, I have to say. I mean, I can't quite find it, but I know it now. Like, I understand, I appreciate it more is really the word. And now they have taken another product and Quipicized it. That's my own term. Mouthwash has not changed in 140 years. We've talked about this, right? Mm-hmm. Like some guy once told me that on a plane. He's like, that guy who's got the mouthwash in the drawer in your office, he's got a problem because there's alcohol in it. Now, I never worked in an office like that, so I didn't really know what he was talking about. But Quip is the makers of the electric toothbrush and the floss that I talk about. Well, Quip mouthwash kills bad breath germs. It helps prevent cavities, and it leaves you feeling fresh thanks to a formula that gives your mouth everything it needs. They have a 4 times concentrate, has fluoride, xylitol, and CPC, but they left out the artificial colors and the stinging alcohol you find in a lot of other rinses. With a customizable subscription, you can get refills automatically delivered straight to your door every 3 months. Quip's refill bottles are made from 100% recyclable plastic. Mouthwash is the perfect finishing touch to a complete oral care routine. You pair it with a Quip electric toothbrush. Both my kids and I have them. Refillable flossers, which I can't stop talking about. And Quip's great tasting, good for you gum. It can help you keep your teeth clean between brushings, and your oral care is taken care of. And if you go to getquip.com/majority5, that's numeral 5 right now, you can get $5 off a mouthwash starter kit. That's $5 off a mouthwash starter kit, which includes a refillable dispenser, a 90-day dose supply of Quip's 4 times concentrated formula at getquip.com/majority5. That's spelled GETQUIP.com/majority5. Quip, it's the good habits company. All right, folks. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor of Economics at Samuel Du Bois Cook, Distinguished Professor of Public Policy at Duke, author of From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. William Sandy Doherty, welcome to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigland.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start with what we have in terms of a racial wealth gap. I mean, the massive disparity that exists in this country between white people and black people when it comes to wealth, and we have one obviously in the context of income too, but wealth is really sort of I think the key marker. There are multiple ways of assessing it. Will you walk through the different ways that we hear people calculate this disparity and the one that you used and why?
Well, I'd like to start by saying that it's really important that we make a distinction between wealth and income, where income is a flow of resources, usually measured in a year's time, that's largely associated with what people earn. In contrast with wealth, which is the difference between what you own and what you owe, or the net value of your personal property, which could be inclusive of real estate for residential or non-residential purposes, retirement funds, business ownership, stocks and bonds, or various types of financial assets. And so that's a critical distinction at the outset. And wealth is, as you suggest, a more significant or important indicator of economic security and opportunity, because wealth can replace lost income. If you have an emergency that results in a decline in your income, like a loss of a job or a medical emergency that confronts your family, if you're wealthier, you're much better able to weather the storm. Now, how do we measure it, and how do we compare the amounts that blacks and whites have in the United States? We measure it.
Can I just ask you one more question about what constitutes wealth? Social Security and pensions. How is that calculated into wealth? Because this is where income will determine. Your income will determine your Social Security payments to some extent, and your pension as well. How is that calculated in the context of wealth? I mean, money that
yes, absolutely. It's in the context of your retirement funds.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Appreciate
Yeah.
that. I just wanted
Yeah.
to double check on that. Now continue. I apologize.
Sure. No, it's an important question. So the way in which we measure people's wealth is by measuring the difference between the assets that they hold and the degree of debt that they hold. And if we're thinking about blacks and whites in the United States, the gulf between black and white wealth is driven much more heavily by differences in assets than differences in debt. The differences between black held assets and white held assets is much wider than the difference between black debt indebtedness and white indebtedness. There are two ways we typically measure the amount of wealth that is held by a community, adjusting for community size. One way is to look at the households that are in the very middle of the distributions for each community. And we refer to this as the measure of wealth based upon the median. And the difference in wealth based upon the median is approximately about $164,000 per black or white household. On the other hand, the other way we can compute the gap in wealth is by looking at the average difference between black and white households, and that's a substantially larger gap. That's approximately $840,900 in net worth between the mean black household and the mean white household. Frequently, people say they prefer to look at the median because it omits folks who are outliers, folks who have extremely high levels of wealth, and folks who have extremely low levels of wealth. But I argue that in the context of thinking about the black-white wealth differential, we have to address the mean or the average. And this is because of two considerations. The first is 97% of the wealth that is held by all white households is held by white households with a net worth above the white median.
Actually, well, let me just that beeper. I did not set that off, but that is a good opportunity for me to just step in and just make that clear to folks that the wealth is so concentrated in this country that, and we see this actually. I mentioned this in the context of often like how much less of income we're capturing under Social Security because of this dynamic.
Yes.
That so much of the wealth. Let's just, for the sake of making it clear, Bezos and Elon Musk and a couple of these guys own so much of the number of dollars that are floating around out there that the wealth is above that median. The all the wealth captured is above that median.
Yes, only 3% of white wealth is held by households at the median or below for white households, but it's not just because of these extremely rich billionaires, a handful of them, although there are a handful of extremely rich billionaires, but 25% of white households have a net worth in excess of $1 million, and it's only 4% of black households. So if we were to ignore the wealth that was held above the white median, we would be taking the vast majority of wealth off the table for consideration.
And how much of home ownership is central to understanding the concentration of wealth as well? I mean, that would be in terms of asset accumulation, probably one of the largest factors that drives this dynamic for and how it continues.
So it's certainly very important for households that are closer to the middle of the distribution. But when we start talking about households that are in the upper 30 to 25% of the wealth distribution, then the share of their assets that's attributable to a primary residence becomes considerably smaller. And if we were to look at the average across all households, a primary residence constitutes maybe about 25% of the assets that households possess. So the remainder is retirement accounts, business ownership, stocks and bonds, and non-residential real estate also, which is very, very important.
I'm just trying to work my way around the mean, where 97% of the wealth is held outside of that mean. It's
above the median, above the middle.
The median. Okay. And yet we should use the mean as the mechanism. Is that it, to determine the actual disparity?
Yeah. So another way to think about it is Black American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States are about 12% of the nation's population, but possess less than 2% of the nation's wealth. So if we set as a target bringing the Black share of wealth into consistency with the Black share of the population, it would require us to simultaneously target the gap in wealth at the mean. If we were to target the gap at the median, we would not approach eliminating the racial wealth gap in the sense of making the Black share of wealth compatible or consistent with the Black share in the population.
And the goal here isn't, and maybe this is just semantics and it's just perspective, but the goal isn't necessarily to achieve parity for parity's sake. The argument is that there have been events, mechanisms over the course of the past 200, 300, 400 years, which have led to that disparity. And so it's really, we are addressing the infractions that took place to create that disparity, rather than a vision of every racial group or different cohort in the United States should have an equal amount of income, right? I mean, it is.
Yeah,
that may be.
That's exactly right. In our book, From Here to Equality, Kirsten Mullen and I argue that the real starting point for the case for reparations that should be directed at the federal government is 1776, with the formation of the new country as an independent nation. Some people say, well, you really should start at 1789 because that's when the Constitution was fully adopted. Fine. If you want to start there, that's okay with us also. The key point is that there's a set of federal policies that have been pursued that promoted white wealth accumulation and led to Black wealth decumulation. And so it's because of public policies that were intentionally designed to craft or create the Black-white wealth gap that we think that that's the appropriate target. It's not a general principle that we should always have intergroup equality over all facets of life. It's because this particular inequality was the consequence of public policy. And it begins with the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with the 40-acre land grants that they were promised as restitution for their years of bondage, a promise that was eliminated and reversed by Lincoln's successor after Lincoln was murdered, Andrew Johnson. In addition, at the same time, the federal government was in the process of providing 160-acre land grants to 1.5 million white families in the Western territories as the nation completed its colonial settler project. These were lands that had been occupied previously by indigenous people, and they're distributed virtually free of charge to 1.5 million white families, leading to a situation where today approximately 45 million living white Americans are beneficiaries of those Homestead Act land grants. So while Black Americans were promised 40 acres, 1/4 of the 160 acres, but then got nothing, white Americans got these substantial land patents in the West. And then during the Jim Crow period, we had a successive wave of massacres, beginning at the end of the Civil War, carrying into the 1940s, white massacres that resulted in the loss of Black lives, but also, with respect to the wealth gap, led to the destruction and or appropriation of Black-owned property by the white terrorists.